I'm here with artist Seth After, who has 3 different ideas for how to use embossing powder.
Hey Julie, these are non-traditional ways to use embossing powder, and they're quick and they're easy, but they have high impact.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
You ready to go? Okay,
yeah.
We're gonna start with something that I already created. You just take any background you wanna work on, and this is acrylic paint and some ink. I'm gonna use texture spray. I love texture. And embossing powder is textural, but I'm gonna add more. So you're just gonna remember with the texture spray, you wanna shake it up to make sure it's all mixed. And then you wanna be cautious when you spray it, because it can get everywhere. Here's a tip.
That sounds like experience talking.
Oh yes, it's on all my clothes. Here's a tip though, if you hold it close, you get very strong impression. If you hold it very high up, you get very loose. So we're gonna kind of go right in the middle.
I was gonna say something medium.
Like that.
And you know, texture can be physical, like burlap or something grainy, and texture can be visual, meaning that it's just creating a difference, right?
Exactly, that's right. It could be actual or virtual. Always shake your embossing powders before you pour it on.
Really?
Yes, you do, because there's multiple crystals in there, and if they settle, then you're only going to get part of the embossing powder.
Great
So
tip.
I'm going to shake it over the whole thing.
Okay.
And I'm not waiting for the texture
I was going to
spray
say,
to dry.
I am used to using embossing powder with embossing ink.
Yep,
so this is
there's
a very different
so
way
many
about
other
thinking
things
about it.
You can use it with. So I'm going to tap it off, and you can see it's stuck where the splatter of
the
spray was. Now
very
I'm
cool.
going to give you this.
Exactly, because we want to save
We
this.
want to save that for
and
later.
I'm going to pour it back
it's
in.
worth a lot. You're going to take a heat tool. That's how embossing works. It's going to melt. But what I really want you to notice is while we melt this, you're going to see what happens with the texture spray underneath.
Okay, are we going to be able to see it melting?
Oh, we're going to see it melting. It's going to change from this flat matte surface to shiny and metallic. But you're also going to see the bubbles.
And now embossing powder, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically plastic.
It's plastic.
And so essentially what you're doing is it's little balls of plastic or crystals of plastic. Ooh, look at the bubbling.
Look at the bubbling. That is the texture spray.
And the heat is basically melting all of it together, and that's the bubbling that you see, is that correct?
Yeah, you're seeing more of the bubbling than you would normally because of the spray underneath. I mean, that's pretty crazy,
those are
right?
some insane
yes,
bubbles.
Now they're gonna debubble a little bit, but when they dry, you're still gonna be left with so much more texture than when you would.
It's like it's alive.
Exactly. Well, I think it might be. Right? Okay, so I'm gonna stop there because I could heat things up forever.
Right. That's can you overheat it? Like I know sometimes with glitter embossing powders, they get very dull.
When it starts to smoke, you're in trouble.
Okay.
So I create this for a textured background, and sometimes I cover my textured background. So if you look at the piece over there that's finished, I have covered a lot of it, but you still see the texture around the sides.
Very
All right, so
cool.
That's tip number one.
Idea number one.
Idea number one. We're going to idea number 2. It's very different. This time we're going to use a translucent
Embossing powder or translucent embossing ink?
Both.
Oh.
You know, your embossing ink when you start is always translucent.
Okay.
But we're going to use a translucent powder. That's kind of important for this tip. And I'm covering the background of something that I've already painted before. But you can do this on any surface. I'm going to take this one, which is translucent.
Now, does your background need to be sealed in any way, or can it just be anything? Like it could be a piece of pattern paper.
Correct. It does not need to be sealed at all. And in fact, the cool thing about embossing this way is that when you finish embossing, it is sealed.
I was going to say that embossing powder looks like it has like diamonds or something inside.
I know, it's got that
very
sheen,
cool.
right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to melt it. This one's going to look very different than the other one.
Is it going to bubble again?
It's not going to bubble at all.
So was it the embossing powder that was making it bubble, or was it the texture spray?
It was the texture spray underneath it. Whenever you use something like matte medium or texture spray, that will bubble. And that's when you have to be careful about burning, because you can burn it.
So that's interesting. So I've always thought that the embossing powder you use mattered, but what you're saying is actually the sort of adhesive,
Correct.
whether it's an embossing ink or a spray ink or a paint or whatever, like that matters as much.
That's correct. And in fact, the traditional embossing ink won't bubble. So what I'm going to do is heat this, and I'm going to repeat this step 3 times until I get a thicker impression. And then what I'm going to do is prep my next step by taking a rubber stamp, putting it on a cling stamp, putting it on the acrylic block, and then I'm going to ink it up and let it sit there, and I'm going to reheat this.
Why are you inking it up? For the color, or because it's going to be a release agent?
The color.
Okay.
It's going to add depth and shadow. You'll see what I'm doing. I'm creating almost like a wax seal.
So you're just remelting that embossing powder, because people should know that even when it becomes hard, if you reheat it, it will start to melt again.
Exactly. And you can wait a day, you can wait a year. and it will melt. But you don't have to worry about it melting in your car if it's hot. So once I get it pretty melted, I'm going to pretty quickly turn this off. I'm going to take my stamp and I'm going to press.
So this is why you inked it up before, because
Correct.
it needs to be fast. You've got to do it right away.
Yes, and I'm going to let
Are
the
you doing a
embossing
lot
powder,
of pressure?
I am putting a lot of pressure because I want to get a deep, deep impression.
Okay.
And I'm waiting about 15 seconds because you need to have the embossing powder cool. And
Oh,
then
so it's going to cool around
it's
the
going to cool
stamp.
around it, and then you're going to lift your stamp. You're going to have the big reveal, and you're going to create. By the way, you're not ruining your stamp at all. Like I never clean anything. I won't clean that. But you have that that deep emboss.
Yeah, and not only that, but I love that like the surface is shiny, but where you stamped is kind of more matte.
It's flat and matte, so there's a great contrast. It's really fun to do. So let's go to the last one. The last one is also a favorite. I guess they're all my favorite.
I was going to say,
So,
I love all my children.
I believe that whenever you create art, if you put an edge or a frame around it, it looks more finished.
Okay.
It's more professional. It has a nice touch. So I'm going to take the embossing stamp pad, and I'm going to go around the edge of this piece. I might do this at the beginning, or I might do it at the very end of my work. And I'm just going to go around, and I'm kind of going to do it a little bit random and loose.
Because you don't want a hard frame, right?
Correct,
You want
not
something
at all.
that's soft and
And
kind of natural.
Correct. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to remember to shake this. I'm going to show you, if it's too hard, what you can do to
Soften it.
soften it up. Which is so
Soften
important.
the edges.
Yes.
That looks like dirt
Yes,
or
it is
gravel
like
or
dirt.
something like
and it's
that.
going to create a great texture because of it. It's got little stones and pebbles in it as well.
Actual stones and
Actual
pebbles?
stones and pebbles.
Whoa.
So let's say I think this is too much of a squared line. I'm going to take an
Okay.
awl, and before I heat it up, I'm going to make sure I get rid of the excess.
So you're actually distressing it.
I am, yep. And
That's
I'm
super cool.
designing it kind of the way I want. And probably I should have left the paper there before. But can't tell you how many times I do that. Now I'm going to heat this up.
So how do the stones and pebbles stick? Does the embossing powder around it just kind of suck them in and
That's
make them
exactly
stick?
what it is.
Okay.
As the embossing powder melts, it encases the little pebbles. And so they're there permanently, but it's the little pebbles that actually create the texture.
Well, I was going to say, it almost looks like marcasite or some kind of like one of those rocks that you would like find that was like broken open and kind of crystallized.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
It's got that look for sure. Now, if you look at the finished piece,
Yeah.
which is also over there, you'll see that it creates this beautiful finished look. I love the frame. You would put something on the wall and frame it. Why not frame the art?
Well, you know what I like so much is basically you're working in a series here. You're using similar supplies, but not the
Yes.
same, a similar stamp, you know what I mean, but not exactly the same, and in different ways. And I think that when you work in a series, you really get to explore your supplies and push your ideas further and in different directions.
100%. I agree with you.
This is so cool, Seth, and I can't wait to try out all these different ideas for embossing powder. I'm going to remember to shake my embossing powder.
Yes.
I'm going to remember to use it not just with embossing ink. Any
Correct.
other tips I need to remember?
Cap it. Because when you don't, the heat tool blows it
That
everywhere.
is the voice of experience. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you.